Mr. Weech, are we ready now?
Ms. Ortega for the Director of Finance. Here. Mr. Unterman. Here. Chairperson Keeley, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Weech. Item number 1 on the agenda is the approval of the committee agenda and work plan. I'd entertain a motion to approve, please. Okay, it's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Thank you. Number 2 is the approval of the minutes from February 4th, 2015 Comp Committee meeting, open session. Any questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve. Okay, it's been moved. And we have a second? Thank you, Tom. That's moved and seconded. Any opposition? All those in favor? Thank you. Item 3 is the revision to Section 700B of the Board's Policy Manual. This is a second reading, and Cassandra Licknock and Christopher Aylman, our 2 staff members, are listed as the presenters. I'll turn it over to Ms. Licknock. Good morning.
I'm sorry, just quickly, that's a typo. Mr. Aylman is here for information, but he's not actually the presenter of the item.
All right, thank you, Chair Keeley. This is the second reading of the proposed changes to the board's compensation policy, Section 700. In February, the committee reviewed proposed policy changes to separate administrative procedures from the actual overall board responsibilities. And during that committee meeting, the board was submitted a proposal for the draft of the new policy, which was a streamlined version, and then the administrative procedures that had the context of the administration of the policy content. Also, during the course of that review, the committee had asked that the qualitative and quantitative weighting allocations and the benchmarks within all of the asset classes and the total funds be reviewed, which was conducted by the committee's, the investment committee's consulting firms, PCA and Makita. And they provided recommendations on the changes to those weightings within the asset classes that they proposed changes to, and the total fund as well. During the proposal submitted in February, there was also a recommendation that the weighting of the within the CEO's incentive criteria be adjusted to away from the total fund and into a more distinct performance-targeted criteria towards sustainability. So that was another proposal. And then there was procedural and technical housekeeping changes that were proposed to address some of the administration of the content of the policy and to clean up some of the areas of ambiguity and things that had changed through the through different policy revisions that we just wanted to provide continuity within the policy of itself. The committee members provided feedback primarily on the technical housekeeping content of the policy and some areas where clarity had been suggested by different committee members, and those changes were incorporated into the policy. The one that I do want to point out was the performance criteria within the Chief Operating Investment Officer incentive criteria, where the project management and customer service component, there was a request that the content within that category be delineated in the policy, just as it is with the head of investment operations. So that was included into the policy. Relative to the proposed changes to the performance benchmarks and weighting allocations, the committee asked that Global Governance Advisors, the compensation committee's consultant, we asked for a 10-year look back, a historical look back on the performance of the current benchmarks as compared to those that are being proposed in the changes. The committee wanted to look or have a view of how the changes would have impacted the incentive awards over the past 10 years. So that is provided in this material as attachment 3. Their analysis found that the performances over the past 10 years would not have changed significantly. Only in the asset class of global equity in the active portion of that portfolio would there have been more of a difference in the at or above maximum target. Global Governance Advisors does, however, suggest that the lower threshold benchmark for the corporate governance and the global equity active portion of the portfolio be that we use the higher of the proposed targeted thresholds. If you remember, PCA had suggested using 60 basis points as the target, and Makita had recommended 50 basis points. Global Governance Advisors had also reviewed the incentive criteria for the CEO, as I had mentioned, and suggested the committee consider reducing the weighting from the total fund and targeting another distinct performance target that the committee thought would be important. Their recommendation included a sustainability component, but advised that any addition of a measure should be one that the committee deems that needs to be distinct from what we already have within the policy criteria outlined. There was a lot of debate and discussion through the meeting, but it was decided at that point that we should probably take this up at a later meeting and possibly at the June performance target setting meeting where we discuss performance targets of the CEO and CIO. So with that, that portion of the policy recommendations have been removed from this second reading. The proposed policy and administrative procedures have now been updated with the context from the February board meeting, the input from the committee members on the technical housekeeping and the procedures, the removal of the changes to the CEO report criteria, and are included in your attachments 1 with the board policy, and then attachment 2, which is the administrative procedures. That is in a red line annotated version so that you can see where the changes have been made. So at this point, I wasn't going to go through all of the detailed information because it was provided and it was linked within the material, and it's in the February material. But I'm happy to address any questions that you may have, or to bring back or gain feedback from the committee so that we can insert it into another draft for us to propose for a third reading in June, or you can take action on any portion that you feel comfortable doing so today.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Cassandra relative to this item? Seeing none. Thank you. Ms. Ortega?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I still have some questions about the payment of the performance awards upon separation. So there are 2 sections. One talks about in the case of a deferral on an incentive decision by the board, if I'm understanding it correctly. So the board defers action on incentive awards for everyone, and in that interim period, someone leaves so that the board acts. And so that would allow the person who's left, if they completed a period, right, that once the board did act, then they would be eligible. And then the other section is not about a deferral, but simply about a person who works in a measurement period and then leaves before the board acts. So maybe starting with not the deferral period, but I'm trying to understand, are we going to be sending someone an incentive award who is no longer working for STRS? And if so, what is the time period? So it seems it's concerning to me to pay someone an incentive award after they no longer work here. So we pay people when they separate for their accrued vacation and things that they have kind of a property right to. But the incentive award is not that. It's something that's a board action, and it's not something that I see the same way. So I'm trying to understand, like, what would the timing be that we would be sending someone a check after they no longer work here?
When the plan completes at the end of the fiscal year in November of whatever plan year, it takes approximately 4 months, 3.5 to 4 months for the payment of that award to be paid, because we have to go through the final return analysis that we get from our custodians. The calculations are performed. We have there's the personal component that takes some time to do. All of that is happening probably in the late August, September timeframe. We formulate the calculations, and then we send it out to an outside auditor. So there's just a time frame to get all of those calculations completed, because it's not just the quantitative returns that we're looking at, it's the qualitative, and then it's the audit of the entire function. And then we wait, and then we have, then we wait until October, where we present those to the board chair on the, what the incentives are going to be distributed. And then at that point is when we pay it after the October, usually after the October meeting. So there's a three-month period. Now, if it was as simple as closing out the plan year and paying the incentive based on what was earned, the payment would happen faster, but it just is the timing of the sequence of events that we have to follow before the payments are awarded. So if somebody, for instance, completes the plan year, has a successful return in their asset class and a successful personal performance that they were rated on, and is offered another job somewhere else on October 1st, if we're not going to issue the check until October 15th because the board meeting was on the 7th, then they're forfeiting the entire plan year's bonus, which is what we don't want to happen. Because then they're either having to delay their employment with moving, or just for the purpose of issuing a check. So that's why we're making the change to the policy, because we want to pay out the award when it has been achieved on an individual basis at the close of the plan year.
I'm sorry, can I just add, there are some tax implications about the timing of the payment. So it really, very simply is the employee doesn't have immediate control of the compensation of the award. It has to be consistent with the plan year and the conditions for award. Otherwise, it has tax implications. So that was part of the design, is to basically for STRS to retain control of the award until the plan year. And so that you would have, at least from a tax standpoint, you would have some lag there.
So, under our current policy, if a person retires or becomes disabled or anything that's involuntary, then they're allowed to benefit from either a partial award or a full award should they have completed that period. But the current policy is if you leave employment, then you get no benefit at all.
If it's within the plan year,
correct. And so it just feels to me like quite a departure to say you're going to go work somewhere else, but we're still going to give you your award. I just have never heard of a compensation structure where you would still receive an incentive award after you've left employment. So I just don't, I understand that it is nice for the person who's leaving, but I don't understand why we are required, or why that's a benefit or a need for us to do that. That's what I'm kind of missing here, is what's the reason to do it, except that obviously it's nice for the person who's leaving, but the person is leaving, so that seems strange to me that we're making it easier for them to leave because they don't have to wait for the award to be paid.
Your perspective is absolutely accurate. I mean, that is one of the considerations on whether or not you pay an award upon separation, even after the plan year has been completed. There's a number of policies that do, I believe, in other funds that do have that handcuffing language in there. What we found, though, is that if we have somebody that is leaving the organization, and we see this when we have somebody leaving the organization, for instance, to move on to another state organization that is also a pension fund, that it's not offset by a recruitment bonus, so they really do lose not only the recruitment bonus, but their incentive pay. And then we start discussing how do we keep, do they stay on longer period of time just to receive the bonus, or is it just for the purpose of, achieving that before they exit the organization? So
if I can follow up on the recruitment bonus side of it. So that's one of the proposals in the policy as well, for STRS to be able to offer the incentive bonus to in-state applicants. Do you know if that is a policy that exists at the other state fund? Because I think that would be the obvious direct kind of relationship. Because the point you made about not being able to offer someone the incentive award to offset their loss of the incentive where they're working, if we're implementing this policy to also allow us to pay the incentive to an in-state candidate, and the other fund has that, then aren't we then setting up a scenario where the applicants could be benefiting from both? They could both get their incentive award when they leave here and get a recruitment incentive from another fund.
Well, I think this is, in fact, we were putting this in place because of that issue of we were recruiting someone from the other pension fund who was potentially experiencing a loss. So, I mean, you wouldn't, so if they were getting an incentive from another system, we certainly wouldn't make a management decision to give them that. I mean, that would be, there'd be no reason for us to offer additional payment if that's your example. But well, we demand the record of their, it doesn't matter if they're private sector or public sector. In order for us to make that differential, we would want a record of it. But we had a real example where the employee's desire to make the switch was reflecting a potential bonus loss at the other system.
Okay.
And we realized we had left a gray area in this around that, so we wanted to be precise.
Yes, except that the proposed change, so now I'm leaving the deferral, or the person who's leaving and moving to the issue on Comp 47, then that language doesn't say we can only pay that incentive if they're not, if they're,
Well, no, I mean, that's just the obvious. Well, we wouldn't say it in any of the situation. I mean, that's the management consideration. All, in the private sector too, it isn't just about CalPERS. It applies to the people we recruit from other investment companies. We make that decision based on the record they're presenting us and the interpretation of that record and the level of, it isn't always black and white. They might be getting a partial bonus. It isn't whether they get a bonus or not get a bonus, but you've got to use some judgment on what it takes to move that employee to our side. But I mean, clearly, it's not in our interest to have anyone have a windfall of money. I mean, we're here to conserve our resources.
well, I think on the issue of the payment upon separation, I will not be able to support that item as part of the policy change. I just don't see how we can justify paying an incentive award to someone who's no longer employed by the system.
I just want to make sure I knew which paragraph you're focusing. Is it on page 45, the number one?
Yes, it's 45 as it
Paragraph
relates
1.
To the general employees, and then it's on page 41 as it relates to deferrals.
But let me just stay with that one first. So is it paragraph 1 upon separation, except
Yes.
as noted, that paragraph?
Yes.
So your concern, I just want to say it back, so I just want to understand, your concern would be that even though someone worked the entire year and met their performance goals and left,
Yes.
because you see the performance payment as part as staying a continuing employee?
Sure. I don't see
Yeah.
the performance award as something that is,
Earned as a result of meeting those bench?
yeah, well, or as something that is a property right in the way that a person's vacation and any other things that we owe to a person who separates.
You know, I understand the point, but actually, I personally experienced that myself when I left the private sector. And I raised that question when I came here as well. But public sector is a whole different animal when you're looking at these pieces. So I appreciate your argument very much. I want to make sure. But we had an awful lot of legal work done on this piece before. Do you have any sense of that one?
Yeah, I do remember, we had tax counsel advising us that there was a property right once it had been earned and determined.
But we haven't been doing it for how, I mean, I guess I haven't seen that analysis.
Well,
And so this is a complete change of our policy today, what's being proposed.
It sounds to me like it sounds to me like staff needs to address that issue for you.
This is a result of a legal property
Yes.
question. That's a completely different
Right.
discussion, I think, than what's been presented.
And I think that it's been some time since, you remember, we had counsel here talking about it. And then I noticed, just following on that, on Comp 43, and one of the, it was pointed out by fiduciary counsel that one of the paragraphs, at least in my version, still has a question, open tax question on page 43, one of those little blocks. So I feel like you would be better served if you at least got something from staff on the tax issue, or from outside counsel.
So
That would be my suggestion.
before I acknowledge Mr. Unterman, as I understand it currently, if an employee earns that incentive, they can actually receive the incentive on a certain date, certain date. and the next day they could actually leave the system. So they're able to stay on for a shortened period of time, knowing that they have an opportunity elsewhere. But without this change in policy, they'll simply stay until they earn their incentive, and then the day after, they wind up leaving.
That's correct. That is correct. The longer though, however, you have to, if the plan year, when the plan year ends on June 30th and we pay it in October and they leave October, we pay it and they leave October 15th, let's say, they've lost 3 months of a performance award with us or somewhere else because they're going into another plan year. So they're going to have incurred a loss already.
Usually is the case, compensation conversations are more complicated than they are evident, because
Seem on the surface.
reasonable, smart people can disagree on how these issues should be implemented.
They
But
are.
let me yield the floor to Mr. Unterman, Ms. Dillon, if that's okay. I think his
Absolutely.
point is on this issue.
Yeah, just two observations. I understand Ms. Ortega's point of view. There is a very common contrary point of view in terms of employee relationships, which is that you like to see your employees succeed and move on and don't try and penalize them when they are. Generally, I think my impression is increasingly in the private sector, people are coming to that point of view with exactly this kind of issue, because otherwise you get a bunch of people who are hanging around for 2 months but not really being there and then getting their bonus and going. Or if you look on Wall Street, the rate of turnover for the end of February is super high because half the firms require you to stay there to get your bonus. And so I think it's a very respectable point of view to not penalize people if they've stayed through the end of the year, earned a bonus, et cetera. That said, I'm quite confused with what Brian is talking about there being, for tax purposes, a property right. That just is something I just don't track at all. So, because individuals are either cash basis taxpayers or they're not. And if you're a cash basis taxpayer, you got the money or you didn't. And constructive receipt, I don't think as a doctrine applies to making a decision as to whether or not to stay in a job. But I could be completely wrong, but I'm not tracking that at all.
And is that something you want Brian to address at this point? Is that something maybe you can have a offline conversation about?
Well, it depends. I'm perfectly happy to approve the policy now, but if we're going to wait for.
Yeah. So Brian, maybe you can provide Tom some additional information, a little side conversation on that specific issue, and when it comes back in June, if there are other legal suggestions or recommendations that could be presented to the full committee in June.
I think so. I think we can get the information before you. If I remember, this was a vigorous discussion 2 years ago. So, and I can give you an overarching view of tax law, but I think I'd be better off doing brain surgery than providing you a specific tax law advice.
Because I think the more pressing issue, at least from my perspective, is the one that Ms. Ortega is raising about this specific policy shift and where we want to land on that. Okay.
We'll be done.
Ms. Dillon?
Okay, I think that I got us into I probably shouldn't say snafu, but possibly, when I was talking about some of the changes that I was asking that we should consider making the last time we reviewed the policy. Because now when I go back and read the policy, it's not making sense to me. So if on Comp 17, we're talking the administrative procedures and the rewrite that we have of that. So Cassandra, I talked about when we, it's the paragraph above authority, where I felt we needed to separate the title of the section with the rest of the paragraph. So.
The purpose?
It now reads, this administrative procedures document is guided by the TRB policy manual, and it has the title, and that ends the sentence. Then we say, this policy is designed to attract, motivate, and retain high-quality executive management and investment staff. And at the very end of that sentence it says, and by the compensation committee's charter. Well, the compensations committee's charter doesn't have anything to do with that policy. It's that we use that policy and the charter to guide the administrative procedures. And so by making the change that I asked for us to make, it actually didn't provide the clarity that was necessary.
Right.
So it almost seems like we should say something like, this administrative procedures document is guided by the compensation committee's charter and by the Teachers Retirement Board, TRB policy manual, and then the section, and then just end with the section.
Okay. We can clarify that. I see what your
Alrighty.
point is.
And then the last paragraph, or the last sentence in there, again, is the sentence that says the 3 documents are meant to be read in harmony. We clarified that in the previous document, the previous policy for the board. We actually named what those 3 documents were. If we could do that there also, just to remind people of what those 3 documents were. And then I had a question, when we're looking at the performance award scales, that's on Comp 29, that the Comp Committee would review and approve the incentive plan's performance award scales. It was actually written into that administrative procedure, and we are now eliminating that because they can be included in the Comp Committee's work plan as desired by the committee. But for me, that doesn't provide a trigger for us to actually put it onto the work plan. And I guess it would have to be during the year through our conversations that we would say, okay, now we want to review these next year. Let's put it on our work plan, or should we do, I'm worried that something's going to fall through the cracks, so if we could at least put into our policy a minimum review period. I mean, it took us 5 years or more to take a look at those. This last time we reviewed them, maybe we need to have some sort of annual review. Are you understanding what I'm?
Well, I'm trying to figure out where you are, to be honest
I'm
with you.
sorry.
You're
We're
on-
taking out the paragraph that says at the beginning of each fiscal year, the TRB's Comp Committee will review and approve the incentive plan's performance award scales.
On Comp 29?
29, are you on?
Yes. That's Comp 29 on my,
Okay. Oh,
under
okay,
it's
I
the
see what you're
third
saying.
paragraph under
I was-
quantitative component
It
measures.
struck out, so I wasn't reading.
Yes.
So, okay.
That's what
It's the struck
that's
out
what we're
part.
removing.
Okay, got it.
Because it said we can remove this because then the Comp Committee can just put it on their work plan when they want to look at it.
Right, okay, so you're saying.
I'm just wondering if I'm afraid that if we just put it on the work plan when we want to look at it, that somehow we'll go an extended period of time and we don't think about it. So should we have some sort of trigger that after every 3 years we'll take a look at it, every 5 years we're going to take a look at it? I put the question out.
I thought let me just, hold on.
And I couldn't remember if we had it in the board policy.
Want to weigh in, Tom? Yeah, Dana, I think Tom wants to weigh in on a,
I suspect that management will, when it's time to look at this, they'll make a point of making sure we do.
Well, having it in there before didn't help, to be honest with you. I mean, so that was, and, I mean, I either regularly or something. But, I mean, we could put,
It's a pleasure of the committee. I'm just throwing it out there.
was there anything else, Dana, from?
Yeah, I have two, I have a
So for
couple more, I'm
that, for
sorry.
that last point, Cassandra, we'll leave it as currently is presented and represent Tom's views there that management will bring it to our attention when appropriate. Dana, back
I'll
to you.
erase my-
Okay, I'm moving on to page 39. The very top paragraph where we talk about the annual evaluation and the annual performance review. Aren't they one and the same?
The top of comp 39?
Or is the annual performance review what we receive from the CEO and CIO during their annual evaluation? I don't know if the two phrases are redundant or if they mean two different things.
I see your point. I'm looking at, I'm kind of digesting how that would read better. I think we could probably take out upon completion of the CEO and CIO annual performance review and just have the annual evaluation following the end of the previous fiscal year. The whole purpose of changing the sentence was to take out a specific date, so I think that we can work.
So my
yeah.
preference actually would be to remove as part of their annual evaluation. And that we say that the awards would be approved upon completion of the performance review?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay,
Thank you.
that was better.
And then, this question's, I think, for Brian. On 43, last time, legal and tax review was going to be done for section 409A.
That was,
Figure if it was in compliance, has that been done?
no, that was what I was, in conversation with Lorena, that was, I was pointing out that this was still, it looked like this was still a dangling item that needed to be completed.
And as I read it,
Yeah,
but my note only said hasn't been done yet.
that's what mine says too.
Thanks. And then, on page 89, or it's comp 55, I'm sorry.
What was the number? I'm sorry.
Comp 55. And Cassandra, I just can't remember what you had actually told me here. The CEO meets with the CIO to review and discuss progress towards performance objectives. That was of the investment staff, not necessarily the CIO, correct?
This is really progress in relative to the strategic plan. It's the executive staff all actually meet quarterly to look at our progress within the organization, but the policy doesn't govern executive staff. So it really, when they're meeting relative to the construct of this policy, it's on what are their goals, was their achievement to the goals relative to their responsibilities.
Just within the two?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, getting into the benchmarks and definitions, I know we talked about having X tobacco and X firearm, and it came
is a-
out X tobacco and X firearm on a couple, and on the others, it was X tobacco and firearm, and then one was X US. So it's, within the benchmarks, it's all referred to differently. So like a non-US equity active custom index, it's ex-US, ex-tobacco, ex-firearms. But then directly above it is just ex-tobacco and firearms.
I know
I
that
think that,
when we had that clarification after our conversation, and my understanding, and I don't know why there's a difference, I think that's a great point, but it was my understanding it was identified as X tobacco and X firearms. But I don't know if there's any clarification that investment staff can make, or if you're, what?
We can tighten that up.
Yeah, we can tighten
It's not a
that up.
big deal.
And we've been shifting a lot of them to just the CalSTRS custom benchmark. As you add
Yeah.
X things, it gets too long.
Is that what you want? Is
Yeah.
that what you prefer there?
I think that would make it more streamlined and more,
We'll do that, we'll go ahead.
it there'd be less room for not having your X's in the right spot
we're gonna-
or whatever.
No, that's,
CalSTRS custom best
Got
benchmark.
it.
So as the list grows, you can consolidate it and be briefed. It's a
Perfect.
custom benchmark, and we know what that references.
exactly.
Anything else?
I got one last
I was
one, but I
hoping
don't
you'd
know.
say, no, Mr. Chair, we can.
I think that's it for this item.
Okay,
That is it.
We'll make those
Thank you,
changes.
Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you. Terry, you want to weigh in? Push the button? Sure. Would you push the button? I'll buzz you in. Just push it. Thanks. Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We support these changes. I think they're important changes. But I do have a concern that I haven't really seen an analysis as to why we're going from 90 to 60 or 60 to 40. I know it's all based upon expected lower, so to speak, investment returns over the near-term horizon, the next 10 years. But I really don't even see much analysis necessarily from either of our consultants justifying going from like 60 to 40 as opposed to 60 to 45. That's one concern. Again, you can't be precise. This is art in addition to science, and I fully appreciate that. It's just that I do have a concern that it's harder to increase these than it is to reduce them. And I'm just not quite certain how much that has been fully considered by our consultants or to this point by us. The other point I'd like to raise has to do with Comp 71, and it has to do with the active and passive allocation, and that it will be floating instead of being fixed at a certain percentage like it has been in the past. In that item on Comp 71, it refers to, it would be weighted by the allocation to each at the period end. And it's not clear, I don't think, procedurally, as to whether or not that's done on an annual basis, like a fiscal year end, quarterly basis, it's adjusted. What is the period end for these calculations?
Thank you very much, Mr. McGuire. I see our CIO, Mr. Elman. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning.
You want to address the first part, why the
Yes,
reduction?
at the February meeting, the two consultants provided you with a one-pager. Behind that, they did do a lot of analysis, and they looked at active management for us and then amongst all of their clients. And they looked at the spread of active management over a period of time. I don't remember if that was in a PowerPoint, but I know at the staff level, we saw their analysis. And I think Neil was present and Makita was present for your February meeting on that. So I'm sure they could provide it again, but it was a detailed review of the success of active management in our portfolio and then what other funds are experiencing as well. And then at the total fund level, they looked at our alpha, and they looked at the alpha of their other clients and compared a perspective of that level of outperformance. On the question of the periodicity, I think it is annual, right? Fiscal year end, so it's the weighted at the fiscal year end. And the reason for that is, as you know, sometimes we have problems with when we terminate managers, hire new ones, and that's not necessarily an active decision. In essence, this eliminates one active decision staff could make, which is if they were more confident in active management. But I think, as you've seen, that turns out to be a very hard decision to make. So now you're actually just measuring specifically, did the passive beat its benchmark and how much, and did the active beat its benchmark and how much, not the weighting between those.
Okay, so it would be adjusted annually
Yep.
at the end of the fiscal year. All right, I might suggest that maybe that should be added or clarified.
Cassandra, did you make note of that? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Elman. Anything else, Mr. McGuire?
No.
Thank you for
Thank you.
raising those points. I'm going to ask staff if you could please have the information that Chris referred to, the analysis that Makita and PCA did relative to these adjustments in the criteria for the bonuses, to be forwarded to us again, just as an information item. Just send it to us. If those of us want to read it a little bit more closely, we can. If we want to delete it, we may. So the point that Mr. McGuire raised and Mr. Elman referenced Makita's work and PCA's work that was presented to us in February, that could be sent to the committee again electronically. For those of us that want to look a little bit more closely at that analysis between now and June, we'll have that opportunity. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so seeing none, just to summarize that conversation that we just had, I think there were three fundamental questions of substantive issues relative to policy that Ms. Ortega raised and Mr. McGuire raised. The issues that were raised by Ms. Dillon were more technical in nature in terms of semantics and wording and the attention to detail that's so critical. So this item will come back to us in June, a little bit revised, for us to take action on. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, which is item number 4, which was the request for information. I think, John, the only information request was the one I just made?
That's correct. I have, Ms. Ortega wanted to see more of the legal analysis regarding
Yes.
the property rights to the incentives for separated employees. Mr. Unterman had a question about the tax analysis on Comp 43. And then the information that was presented at the February 15th by Makita and PCA regarding the compensation and the differentials to be
Thank you very much.
forwarded under separate cover.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Weech. Appreciate it. Item 5 is the draft agenda for the next committee meeting, which is in June. So we will be looking at this revision of the policy again for third reading and hopefully some adoption. The information items that we'll be looking at in June will review the charter for this committee, and we'll begin to talk about our work plan for the 2015-16 year. So that is in our packet for our June meeting. Anything else that I need to mention, Cassandra, that can you think of? That's-
The other items that are coming up would be the CEO and CIO performance target that goes to the full board. So that's, a lot of times we're talking about it here, so it feels like it's missing, but that, and then the salary review for those positions. So, but those will be in the full board sessions.
And did you have some support on the work that you've been doing on this policy from any of our consultants? If you could just recognize and acknowledge who's helped put this before us.
Yes, I've had a tremendous amount of support from staff, so I'm not doing this on my own. Certainly, Lita Johnson and Melissa Norsha have been key staff people who have been working on this and keeping track of all the notes. So I really do appreciate their help and I appreciate your recognition of them.
All right, thank you very much. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, the committee is adjourned. Thank you.